Tonight, reckless, dangerous and fueling the fire. The Kremlin responds to President Joe Biden, allowing Kyiv to use long-range missiles inside Russia. Serious and pragmatic, Keir Starmer meets the Chinese president at the G20 summit, the first time a British Prime Minister has done so in more than 6 years. Strip searches should be a last resort. Greater Manchester Police bring in new rules over treatment of women in custody after an investigation by Sky News. The politics of life and death, the row brewing over the government's handling of assisted dying legislation, despite the PM insisting the government remains neutral. And hashtag Head Blue Sky. Is there an exodus from Twitter after the role Elon Musk played in Donald Trump's historic election victory? All that and more with Nick Ferrari and Ben Bradshaw, who'll be with us for the next hour. It's Monday, I'm Sophy Ridge live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. The G20 summit of some of the world's most powerful countries feels a bit like the closing of a chapter. It's Joe Biden's last chance to change the narrative before a new president takes over on Ukraine, on economics, on climate. What can he push through before Donald Trump enters the White House? Is there anything in his legacy that he can make solid and permanent before the great dismantlement begins? That's why you've seen Joe Biden allowing Ukraine to strike inside Russia using long-range missiles supplied by America. It's an attempt to change the outcome of the war before Donald Trump gets into power. A man who once promised to end the conflict in 24 hours and is sceptical about the cost and also, I guess, the righteousness of supplying Ukraine with US weapons. But it's not just in America that it feels like a chapter is being closed. In Germany, the government of Chancellor Olaf Scholz has collapsed. In Canada, Justin Trudeau's Liberals look to be on the way out, as does the Labour Party in Australia. The right is on the rise in France too. And as left-leaning Liberal governments are exiting stage right, they're making way for the populists. The next chapter, it feels, will be dominated by the strong men of the world. Donald Trump, China's Xi Jinping, India's Narendra Modi. Britain, under Keir Starmer's progressive left-leaning government, is looking increasingly like the exception. Who will his natural allies be? Or maybe the better way of putting the question is this, which of his unnatural allies will Keir Starmer be most able to do business with? I do wonder if that puts the meeting with President Xi of China, the first by a British Prime Minister in 6 years, in a slightly different light. Well, we'll find out soon what Joe Biden's decision on long-range missiles means for the war in Ukraine and for global politics. But let's look now at how it may shape the battlefield. Our international correspondent Alex Rossi has more.
After months of pleas from the Ukrainians, America has finally allowed Ukraine to use US missiles to strike deep inside Russian territory. So is this the game changer that could turn the tide in Kyiv's favour? The Americans had already provided Ukraine with the MGM-140 Army tactical missile system, but there were limitations on its use. Known as ATACMS, they're long-range ballistic missiles that can strike targets 186 miles away with a warhead that can hold about 375 pounds of explosives. ATACMS can have two types of warhead, a single high-explosive variant, as well as a warhead that can carry cluster munitions. Ukraine has said they could be used to stop or slow down troop movements or destroy Russian air or military bases, which would help Ukraine in the defence of its own territory. And this map shows how far the missiles could reach inside Russia and the potential targets. They include airfields, ammunition warehouses, radars, and missile bases. Now, on the face of it, it's a big military edge, but the Russians are already responding by moving hardware and personnel out of range. The Biden administration has made clear it's the presence of North Korean troops here in the Kursk region that pushed them to change their minds on the use of ATACMS. It means the Ukrainian army can now use them to repel Russia's anticipated counteroffensive in Kursk. Ukraine captured this territory in August and is now attempting to defend it. President Biden's decision will likely see the British government follow suit, allowing the use of its Storm Shadow missiles. Storm Shadow has a shorter range, about 155 miles, and it's launched from an aircraft. But the Russians are furious, seeing this latest development as a major provocation as it crosses some of Putin's red lines. They've not made clear how they'll respond, but a response is coming. It could take the form of support for the West's enemies or even a cyber attack on its interests.
The Russians are plainly very angry. There are things they could do. They could, for example, supply missiles to the Houthis to use against Western tankers in the Red Sea. I think they're likely to be quite constrained because they are looking forward to Trump's arrival in the anticipation that Trump will put pressure on Ukraine towards doing some sort of a deal. And they won't want to take any actions which complicate the likelihood of that.
Allowing long-range weapons to be used deep inside Russia is a major development. It will certainly be a boost for Ukraine's morale at a time when it's losing ground in the Donbass. But it's unlikely to change the trajectory of the war in isolation. The deep strikes will, though, be a complication for Moscow. It will make it more difficult for President Putin to present the war as an overwhelming success, especially if Russian military assets start blowing up well inside its territory.
Alex Rossi there. Well, we can cross now live to Rio, where our political editor, Beth Rigby, is travelling with the Prime Minister at the G20. So, Beth, let's talk first about Ukraine, shall we? How has that decision by Joe Biden gone down?
Well, Sophie, quite simply, allies won't discuss the decision. Joe Biden doesn't want to talk about the decision, and Keir Starmer certainly doesn't want to talk about the decision, nor does he want to discuss whether President Biden will green light the use of UK missiles. I asked him at length about this in a pool clip for broadcasters earlier. This is what he had to say. Take a listen.
I'm at the G20 with one message, which is that we must double down on our support for Ukraine. Tomorrow is day 1,000 of the conflict. That's 1,000 days of aggression from Russia and 1,000 days of sacrifice from Ukraine. So that is my clear message here. It's number one on my agenda. Obviously, I'm not going to get into operational details because the only winner, if we were to do that, is Putin, and I'm not prepared to do that.
Can you at least in principle say whether you'd like them to be green-lighted? Because I think you would.
I'm not going to get into operational details because Putin is the only winner in that situation.
And your government has announced a shift in policy towards China. You met with President Xi today, the first Prime Minister in 6 years to do so. It has been controversial back home, not least because of those suffering human rights abuses in China, China's support for Russia. Do you understand the risk?
I've been clear that I want a serious and pragmatic relationship with China. It's the second biggest economy in the world. It's one of our biggest trading partners, and therefore we have issues that we clearly need to discuss, whilst of course being clear about the issues that we do not agree on. But I will always act in the national interest, and that was the basis upon which we had our discussions this morning.
So the Prime Minister there just simply saying, I am not getting into it, I am not going to discuss operational details. He said Putin is the only winner in that situation. He has a line at this conference which is about doubling down and shoring up support for Ukraine as long as it takes. When you ask him about what that actually looks like in practice, i.e. does it look like the use of these long-range missiles, which Zelensky has long been asking for, and actually our own Prime Minister and President Macron have long been pressing President Biden for, they simply won't say. And I suspect what might happen is tomorrow will be the 1,000th day of this conflict. And I think what will happen, Sophie, is if they do decide to sanction the use of these weapons, they will be green-lighted, and we will only find out about this after they have, if they are used. I think that's where the line is being held. But obviously clear questions about a Prime Minister saying it's important to double down and then refusing to be drawn on what that actually looks like. But I think we can see the contours of that in Biden's decision to sanction the use of these long-range US cruise missiles, and then what that means for Storm Shadow, our own capabilities, which Zelensky would like to utilise.
And Beth, I saw you there also asking Keir Starmer about that decision to meet with the Chinese president, the first time, of course, that any UK Premier has done so in 6 years. He said it was a pragmatic decision. What do you think he was aiming for?
Well, I think what we have here is a Prime Minister that is looking at a Trump White House. He's contemplating tariffs potentially from our biggest trading partner. And then he's looking to our second biggest trading partner, China. And he's thinking, can I do more business with Beijing? And it simply is about economy for him. He has promised to get UK to be the fastest growing G7 economy. Well, the last growth figures put us right at the bottom of the pile. So this is about what he called a serious and pragmatic relationship where the UK and China could do more business. To that end, there will be a bilateral meeting potentially between Beijing and London next year, but obviously controversy around human rights and blocking parliamentary figures going to China. He said he did raise these at the meeting, but clearly controversy about this at home, and President Trump might be none too happy either.
Beth, thank you. I have to say, Beth, that is one of the most beautiful backdrops I think I've ever seen for a live broadcast, although I suspect you're not going to get much time to enjoy it, sadly. Thank you very much. Beth Rigby there, our political editor. Well, we were just discussing China a little bit earlier. I spoke to the former Conservative Party leader, Iain Duncan Smith.
Well, I find it rather peculiar that he met President Xi on the back of the G20 before his China review has taken place. So what we have done, what he has done rather, is kind of preempt that. I was also concerned that he seemed to be oblivious to the nature of what was going on already when Xi met Biden, who said basically he laid out 4 red lines, which included human rights, any question about what they did in mining or burning coal or any of these other things, or the nature of their government. He said these are red lines, basically, to Biden, and we're not going to brook any interference. And that included Taiwan. So he enters this conversation or discussion with a whole bunch of red lines blocking him off, even if he attempts to raise them. And then we saw what happened when he did try to raise Jimmy Lai. They cleared the journalists out of the room. They weren't going to have it. So, you know, it looked to me very much like Prime Minister, maybe because of the budget, desperate to get some kind of trade arrangement for growth. Meanwhile, the Chinese rather patronizing him and even repeating his own words back to him, saying, you know, get to the issues that he had raised during the course of the budget and further debates, which is get to the foundations, restore the foundations, I think he said back to him, which is sort of patronizing, really.
I guess, you know, you say there that this is a Prime Minister who may be desperate to get growth after the budget. And there'll be some people maybe who would argue that that's OK. You know, that is the pragmatic relationship we need with China to, you know, allow people to buy cheap toys for their children or to buy affordable cars or to protect that trading relationship. Do you have any sympathy with that?
No, none whatsoever. Because what we're actually getting when we get those cheap toys is slave labor. China is guilty of slave labor, not just in Xinjiang, persecution of Christians, huge organ harvesting and selling of organs after their executions. You know, they threaten Taiwan on a daily basis. They've taken over the South China Sea. And when the Prime Minister talked about pragmatism, he also talked about an arrangement in line with past treaties and arrangements. I think there was a phrase he used. Well, doesn't he remember what happened to the Sino-British agreement in Hong Kong? President Xi just trashed it when he didn't think it was working, didn't say anything to us, as now arresting peaceful democracy campaigners, most of all, of course, Jimmy Lai, who was the editor and owner of Apple Daily, a critic of authoritarianism. And I think this is the main bit, that the more you go desperate for trade, you also get desperate for trade at almost any price. And even as companies are beginning to turn away from China now because they get their IPs stolen, they get real problems from the bureaucracy in China, we have a government now suddenly lurching into this, as I said earlier on, before they've even completed their supposed China review, to look at whether or not China is a threat, which I believe they are, because they're supporting Russia, they're involved with Iran, they've courted North Korea to go and work with Russia, and they've been involved heavily in the Gulf as well. So I find this whole process desperate, but also rather sad, because this was a government in opposition that voted to support the idea that China was guilty of genocide in Xinjiang, but now seems to be retreating from that.
I mean, look, the human rights abuses that you kind of lay out are very compelling, very, very moving as well, I should say. At the same time, there are a lot of imperfect leaders in the world. Should we be refusing to do trade with all of them? Particularly at a time when, the leaders that we might want to be doing trade with might be about to kind of slap tariffs on the UK.
Well, that in a sense is the irony. The Prime Minister seemed very keen to go and war game a response to the USA on tariffs without actually talking to the USA about opening up trade arrangements and a trade deal, our biggest trading partner, a very significant one, which we actually have a trading surplus with, which is not what we have or are likely ever to have with China. All of that are possibilities, but we go rushing to China, and we know very well China's about to dump electric cars on the UK market, huge, cheap numbers of electric cars, also batteries, which will pretty much drive the UK car business out of business, as it were. And we still haven't said anything about tariffs when Europe is about to put tariffs on Chinese goods as well as America. So it does seem peculiar that we've left China out of the loop in that regard, but desperate for trade with them at the same time, despite all the abuses, the sanctioning of British MPs, of which I'm one, but the human rights abuses aren't just issues, they are on a scale that is unimaginable.
I'd like to get your thoughts as well on some of the other issues at the G20 too, because obviously there's been a lot of analysis and a lot of debate about Joe Biden's decision to allow Ukraine to use these American long-range missiles to fire into Russia. Obviously, as you would expect, that hasn't gone down well with the Kremlin, but it also hasn't gone down well with some around Donald Trump either. What's your own view? Is that a legitimate use of US weapons? Was it the right call?
Yeah, it's all very well for us to say we support Ukraine, as we have done, and it's all very well to say we want them to fight for their own freedom, but we'll supply the weapons, when we put conditions on the use of those weapons. I mean, it's like asking somebody to go into a boxing match with one hand tied behind their back, whilst the other person is completely free to do whatever they like. And that's what's been happening. Russia has been I visited Ukraine on 2 occasions up near the front, and Russia has been pounding the cities, civilian institutions, also all their power sources, for heating, electricity, etc. They've been destroying as many of those as they possibly can, free quite happily in the knowledge that Ukraine will not be allowed to use its missiles that it gets from the West to target their airfields, their supply depots, and their drone sites at the same time. This was the right decision to take. I wish Biden had taken it before, because they wouldn't be in this position now if they'd had this decision 8, 9, 10, maybe a year ago, 8, 9, 10 months ago, but nearly a year ago. It would have changed things altogether. I would now, if I was the government, be working very hard to talk to President Trump to get him to understand this is vitally important that this is done.
On that, with President Trump, he said during the campaign that he could solve the conflict in 24 hours. There's obviously a lot of concern that effectively means making Ukraine give up parts of its territory to Russia. How concerned are you about what a Donald Trump presidency means for Ukraine?
I don't believe that Donald Trump will turn around and say, I have the plan, stick to the plan, or else we're just going to desert you. I just don't think that's going to happen. There's quite a lot of rhetoric about that. They don't want to get engaged into foreign wars, I know that, but they're not engaged in foreign wars. The idea that Ukraine can defend itself means that American boots do not have to go on the ground as they had done in Afghanistan and other places, which he was then opposed to. So the clear point to make, which I made back in December when I visited many of the Republican congressmen and women to persuade them to vote for the bill that they were blocking, and they then subsequently did, the main point I made is, if you support Ukraine with weapons and with money, you are guaranteed never to have to put American soldiers' lives at risk in that theater of war. Now, that's critical and very much important, vital information that they had to take into consideration. I think President Trump will do the same, which is maybe he'll try to get some agreement. But if it's an agreement that trades the territory they've taken over now, it's not acceptable to Ukraine, nor it should be. So we should be saying, look, if Russia, all its brutality is going to try and cling on to these territories, then we can't do a deal with it.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Great to have you on the programme this evening. Right, let's bring in a duo for this evening, shall we? The broadcaster Nick Ferrari and the former Culture Secretary, that is Ben Bradshaw. Great to have you both on the programme today. Well, we were just talking there, I mean, so much to discuss, isn't it, with the G20, but we were just talking there specifically about the issue on Ukraine, the big decision by President Biden to allow US missiles to strike inside Russia. And now I guess there is an expectation, is that too strong, that Keir Starmer may follow suit? What's your view on this, Ben?
Well, I completely agree with what Iain Duncan Smith just said on Ukraine, not on China. But I think Keir obviously wants to do more. I think he and the French government have been lobbying Biden to come out with this announcement. And I would be very surprised if we didn't row in behind it, if indeed this is what America does and it happens. So, but I think the way that he handled it, and I thought it's a bit unreasonable for him to give any more details. And as he said, you know, you've got to have an element of surprise. You can't let Russia know what your intentions are. And if the principal decision has been made, that's all you need to be able to say. And I think it's the right decision, and I'm glad he's done it. Yeah,
it's a bit of a weird military tactic to let your opponent know exactly what it is you're planning on doing.
And a bit naive of the media to expect anyone to talk very much about that in detail.
Is there any point to all of this if Donald Trump's going to take over next year, though, Nick?
Well, it's quite a Ukraine U-turn, isn't it, by the United States? I think when Trump, if you look at what Donald Trump Jr. said, if you saw the social media post, he's stopping my father bringing world peace and saving lives. So the hope and expectation regarding Trump 2.0 is extraordinary. I think Iain Duncan Smith, or maybe one of your correspondents said, they will look to do a deal. It's interesting. I think it was your former ambassador who said, Kremlin probably won't react immediately because they've got an investment. They think that they might actually have some ground that they can make up with Donald Trump. And for God's sake, on both sides, let's hope there's something there. So it is a surprise. What are you meant to do? If North Korea, I read today, 10,000 troops just sent to that one area of Kursk and more on their way. Well, you have to counter that with something. What Trump brings to it will be fascinating. If it is a deal, then that is one reason that we can celebrate a change of power at the White House.
Yeah.
Depending on the deal, of course. Yeah. But I think what we can celebrate in this country is we have a very strong level of bipartisanship on this. There's not really any difference between the current government and the previous one on our support for Ukraine. And we just hope that the optimists are right about what Trump will do when he takes over.
Yeah, well, it's stalemate now. So it needs and I mean, I remember the brilliant politician who you know better than I, Mo Molam, and I remember challenging her over how could you sit down with the IRA, and she just said, well, how else? It's a bit like China. You have to sit down with your enemies. You have to talk. And whether Trump facilitates, I mean, it's an extraordinary thought, isn't it? But whether Trump actually facilitates those sort of talks, well, you know, here's hoping.
Yeah, and I think there was one of our kind of military analysts on Sky put it to me that there's a risk of Ukraine losing slowly, which in many ways is kind of the worst of all sort of worlds. This kind of grinding, depressing situation where, you know, it's not great for Ukraine anyway.
Yeah, and you know, Ukraine is obviously, you know, aware of the global realities of a Trump presidency and what that means, and they will, you know, be doing to achieve whatever they can. But I think this missile decision is significant for them because it will boost their morale. It will hopefully help them in not just stopping the Russian missiles arriving, but stopping them being fired in the first place. And I just think it's a pity it's taken so long. I mean, we've been pushing for it for a while, and the Biden White House has been very, very cautious over this. But I'm glad they've come to the right decision in the end.
Thanks both very much indeed. You're watching the Politics Hub. Coming up, we'll bring you a special report as Greater Manchester Police says it will end the use of almost all strip searches. We'll also bring you the latest from the parliamentary lobby as the Prime Minister insists the government is neutral on the assisted dying bill.
I'm Stuart Ramsey and I'm Sky's chief correspondent.
An enormous explosion that's just come down. I think it was a monster just landed in between us.
Hundreds and hundreds of people hoping to get north, ultimately to get to the United States.
It's a border where they're not welcome, yet they keep coming.
It's our
snatch squads going in, grabbing people, taking them out and putting them into trucks and taking them away.
They make about 50 kilos of fentanyl a week. It's incredibly dangerous and toxic stuff.
There's been an upsurge in deaths. The fighting between the gangs is getting more and more vicious.
Is this now all your territory?
Yeah.
The battlefield is outside the barricades, which is over there. This is much more like a normal town. It's really sending a clear message that Venezuela is eager for change.
We're being crushed. Free from wherever you get your news.
We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive. This is real, hardcore emergency medicine.
The information on this could bring down the entire network, not just in Iraq and Syria, but across the world. Sky News, the full story first.
Hundreds of thousands of people have been using the beast for years to traverse Mexico, but it is really dangerous. Many people have died riding it.
The most significant day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
Just want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
Hello, welcome back. Well, Greater Manchester Police says it will end the use of almost all strip searches after a review criticised the way its officers were treating women and girls. Well, it was all sparked by an investigation by our Home editor, Jason Farrell, and his team, Liz Lane and Sarah O'Connell. A warning that Jason's report does contain some content that viewers may find distressing.
Sophie was in an abusive relationship.
He punched me, put his hands around my throat, thumbs in my eyes, and wouldn't let me leave the house. I just thought I'm probably going to end up in a grave at some point.
After this incident, she reported her partner and he was arrested and charged. But 6 weeks later, the police turn up at Sophie's door at 3 a.m. She's taken to this police station and left in a cell for 11 hours. Why? Because her abusive partner made counter-allegations, accusing her of breaking the wing mirror on his car and hurting his arm at a time when he'd strangled her.
They knew what I'd gone through. They knew what I was trying to protect myself from. I was in regular contact with domestic violence support workers who were meeting with police liaison. They knew that I'd had the locks changed. They knew I had an alert on the house and my phone.
Sophie's case became part of a review published in July this year into the practices of Greater Manchester Police, which found the reasons for her arrest were unreasonable.
One of them was that she had bruised his arms on the day when he tried to strangle her. And I tell you, ladies and gentlemen, if someone tried to strangle me, I'd probably bruise his arms as well.
Dame Vera said the arrest was unlawful, and the Chief Constable had this reaction to the case.
I'm appalled by it. I am a professional police officer, and I am surrounded by thousands of good police officers who will simply and similarly be appalled.
There were a lot of people involved in that arrest, and they all got it wrong.
Indeed. It's a systemic failure, a leadership failure, a process failure.
The Baird inquiry was prompted by a Sky News investigation into the treatment of women in custody, which showed officers abusing their powers, including unlawful arrests and strip searches. Today, an update from the Mayor's office says GMP has ended so-called welfare strip searches, and an independent scrutiny panel will look at arrests and custody records, and an independent custody visitor will make unannounced visits.
There is significant progress, particularly the ending of strip searches. That is a big deal, and I would like to see that implemented across England and Wales.
But questions remain. After the Baird review was published, Sophie made a formal complaint about her treatment, but GMP's complaint system told her the service provided by the police was acceptable. Only when she told them she was part of the Baird inquiry did they reverse this.
That is why I am so pleased that Andy Burnham is going to have a scrutiny panel to look and see how complaints are being done now. Have we made a change? Was this the old regime? And now we can look forward to some sunny uplands.
GMP told us complaints, including Sophie's, are subject to a fair and thorough examination by professional standards, and where there's a case to answer, officers will face disciplinary proceedings. But Sophie's one of several complainants we've spoken to who say the police still don't recognise their own failings.
I wouldn't just be OK with reporting something now. I would look at the consequences of me doing that and what could happen to me as a result of that and how they might treat me.
No officer has been disciplined yet as a result of the Baird inquiry. Jason Farrell, Sky News.
Joining us now is the former Greater Manchester Police Detective Constable Maggie Oliver. It's great to have you on the programme, it really is, and thank you for being with us. Do you welcome this rethink on strip searches?
My response to this is that we are talking here about unlawful strip searches, unlawful arrests. I was a serving police officer for 16 years, and in all that time, it was only necessary for me to be involved in one strip search. So I think that the Baird review went far wider than just strip searches. And what horrifies me really is that we've got this, what I see really as a public relations exercise today, focusing on one tiny part of the Baird review, and yet the victims who formed part of the Baird review, I think there were 14 in the end, and we were key to that. The Maggie Oliver Foundation were a big part of that review. All of those victims, to the best of my knowledge, except for one of those victims, has still to have a resolution to the way they were treated. They haven't had any outcome. So for me, this is kind of putting the cart before the horse. We should be looking at their treatment. We have a complaint system that is completely unfit for purpose. Dame Vera said herself that the treatment of many of these victims was barbaric. And I recognise that Rome wasn't built in a day. But what I would say, all those bad apples that were identified in the process of the Baird review, which actually, let's be right, was started well over a year ago now, nearly a year and a half. If those bad apples are still in post, there has been no accountability, there has been no punishment, they haven't, any of them lost their jobs, and the victims are still left dangling without a response to the horrendous treatment that they suffered. So for me, this is a tick box exercise in a way, and I don't want this to be all negative. I have seen some positive changes in GMP since the new Chief Constable came in. They are more willing to communicate. We at the Foundation do have regular meetings with senior officers, and we feel that the victims that we take early doors to have their cases looked at now are heard more quickly. But the bigger picture is that this is police marking their own homework again. And I'm a little bit concerned as well that, to me, I hear Andy Burnham sounding the praises. His role for me should be as a critical friend, and he should be looking at the bigger picture and making sure that complaints are dealt with quickly, efficiently and properly, and victims aren't once again forgotten about in a report. This should be about them, and it isn't.
It's interesting you're saying there, well, there's so many interesting things to unpick. The fact that the police, you say, are kind of marking their own homework, the fact that this is just a small part of a much wider issue, and that the victims who, as you describe, were treated in a barbaric way, still not facing justice. What do you think it is that's driving this? Do you think there's misogyny in the police force? Do you think it is effectively people who think that they are above the rules? What's going on?
Yeah, I think it ties in with what I've just said about a complaint system that is completely unfit for purpose. It is not independent. I know they're talking about an independent scrutiny panel, but the real question is who will be on that panel? Will it be more senior police officers? Will it be other people who I see as part of the establishment? It should be people who are truly independent. And we need speedy resolutions. We need these victims who have been fighting to be heard now for some of them for more than 2 years, because we've been fighting for them. And it was actually only when Sky and Jason and ourselves became involved in highlighting these failures that anything was done again. It shouldn't be that it's only victims who come to us for support that are heard, or that Sky focus a spotlight on these failures for something to be done about it. But this, for me, doesn't go far enough. Many of the 40 recommendations were things that I would have said were basic human rights anyway, and shouldn't have to be formed as part of this report. You know, sanitary products for women, female officers on duty, children's cells, they are basic human rights. We're looking here at what was a serious abuse of power. Even Vera Baird said that the treatment of so many of these victims was barbaric. So to focus on unlawful strip searches and presenting this as a real success, I think there is far more that needs to be done in relation to what Dame Vera uncovered. And the first of those things, for me, should be ensuring that those victims who were treated horrendously, inhumanely, should have their complaints speedily addressed. They've already been waiting 18 months, 2 years, and yet now we have a report that focuses on a tiny bit and the victims are still left hanging. And for me, that is just not good enough.
Thank you so much for being on the programme. You speak very powerfully about these issues. You're clearly very passionate about them as well. Thank you. Right, let's bring a duo back in, shall we? Nick and Ben, great to have you here. I think the thing that really jumped out to me, or one of the things from Jason's report, was, you know, this woman complained to the police about her treatment. They said it was acceptable. And then they found out she was part of this inquiry and they said, oh, really sorry, we're going to look into this again. I mean, that kind of says it all, really, doesn't it, Nick?
Look, I want to start by saying we actually are incredibly fortunate. There are very brave men and women who are out there now serving in our police forces, doing the sort of job that I'm not brave enough. But the point I take from what we've heard from Maggie is, unfortunately, there is a crisis of confidence in a lot of our police services or police forces at the moment. And in part, it is fuelled by how senior officers deal with complaints that come in. And clearly, this was not dealt with properly. And when we hear someone like Maggie, who will obviously, I mean, A, she has extensive experience of having worked with the GMP, B, she has this campaign now, so she knows what's going on. This is a job where, a bit like doctors and surgeons, they cannot be allowed to use the expression to mark their own homework. If we are to rebuild confidence in our police, when we could spend the rest of our show going through the various issues that played into it, but we're very lucky. They are a tremendous bunch, mostly. Of course, there are a few bad ones, but men and women, we have to build and the way they do that is a root and branch review. And when you've got bad cops who behave in a bad way, you identify and you move on them.
And I guess it's the same for all of our institutions, right? If you're talking about the NHS, if you're talking about politicians, if you're talking about police, it's about, I guess, the scrutiny process and the accountability as well.
Yeah, it shouldn't be left up to Sky News to expose this, but congratulations for doing so. But it sounds as if you're going to have to do a bit more work to hold Manchester Police's feet to the fire.
I'd say Maggie's like, that's only the start of it, Sky.
Not
Look at all the other bits.
Not everyone's quite satisfied yet. So obviously you've unearthed something. There are still people who aren't happy. There's more job to do for your reporter up there, and also Andy Burnham needs to keep an eye on what's going on, because if as the previous interview you said, this is just a kind of tiny element of it, and the underlying culture is not being addressed, then that problem will just come back to bite Manchester Police in future. Yeah,
it does feel like that. Thank you both very much indeed. Good to get your thoughts on this important story. Well, now to a little row over the handling of one of the most controversial pieces of legislation that MPs will vote on during this Parliament, the Assisted Dying Bill. It's obviously incredibly sensitive. The Prime Minister said it's going to be a free vote, but there is apparently disquiet among some senior members of the Cabinet speaking out about the bill. Our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, has more.
Well, Sophie, as we've been talking about for weeks, the assisted lying legislation doesn't have a government whip. MPs aren't being compelled to vote one way or another. But what I am picking up is the whole way that this legislation is being done is causing deep concern, particular concern, actually at the top of government and in Downing Street. Why is that? Well, partly for the very simple reason that it's starting to dominate so much, and dominate with the kind of stories that Downing Street just don't want to see, particularly Labour MP, Labour Minister, attacking or implicitly criticising other Labour MP or Labour Minister. Red on red action. We saw it for years through the Brexit debate. Now we've got it in a slightly different way here with the assisted dying debate. Just this morning we had Bridget Phillipson come out against the legislation. It sounds as if Angela Starmer. Rayner will be against the legislation. Wes Streeting really threw the hand grenade into this whole thing last week, where he doubled down on his criticism of it and commissioned an analysis of the costs, thereby raising big questions, saying that there could be cuts to the NHS. And that's caused dismay, most notably with Harriet Harman on my colleague Beth Rigby's Electoral Dysfunction podcast. But others also feel let down by the tone of this debate. All of this, in short, Sophie, is slightly spinning out of Downing Street's control. And here's the thing I've picked up. Even the guy at the top of the staff inside Downing Street, Chief of Staff Morgan McSweeney, is worried because if this passes a week on Friday through the Commons in that big vote, second reading vote on the principles of the bill, in that scenario, this issue is going to dominate months of next year. And that's going to be months concentrated on assisted dying, not borders, not the economy, and months of red-on-red attacks, Labour MPs criticising and taking different positions on this very, very eye-catching subject. I'm told that if the bill died a week on Friday, Morgan McSweeney would not be upset.
That's interesting, given the importance of Morgan McSweeney to the Keir Starmer project. There'll be some who think, though, what's the problem with Labour MPs disagreeing on this? Because, look, it is a free vote. Perhaps this is Parliament, at its best. It's something when MPs are genuinely debating, they've got differences of opinion. What's wrong about that?
Well, I think the concern of number 10 is that really this is just crowding out the kind of messages that they want people to hear from their politicians. But actually, I think there's a sense that the government, Downing Street, took their eye off the ball with this. Consider this, Sophie. The government, if this legislation passes, is going to be central to delivering it. Say Parliament does end up giving its approval to assisted dying, then there would presumably have to be some kind of national service to deliver assisted dying. But how much would that cost? Who would that involve? Would it take resources away from the existing NHS? Would the judiciary be involved, and in what way? And would that be existing High Court judges? How would that impact hard-pressed court services? There are an awful lot of questions that perhaps weren't initially thought about when Keir Starmer made his original promise back in March to broadcaster and campaigner Esther Ransom that he'd give some parliamentary time. That was quite an easy commitment back then. But now the issues involved have got a hell of a lot more thorny. He's got half the cabinet opposing it quite vociferously, the half involved in implementing it, and no easy answers to all sorts of different policy questions that flow from this legislation. What looked straightforward a few months ago now feels, I am told, inside Downing Street like a bit of a mess.
Sam Coates there. Now, you may remember a key issue during the build-up to the general election was whether bets were placed on the day Rishi Sunak called for the snap election. Well, now a politician and a close protection guard are among those the Gambling Commission is looking to prosecute. The person with the story is our chief political correspondent, John Craig. What can you tell us?
Well, this inquiry has been going on since June. It all started when a Conservative MP, Craig Williams, who was the Prime Minister's parliamentary private secretary, the former Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, outed himself and said, yes, I put a bet on £100, he would have won £500. And, of course, what they've been looking into is, was this inside knowledge? Was there cheating involved here? Now, I've been told today by a source the Gambling Commission is looking to prosecute at least 3 suspects, but possibly up to 5. This includes a politician and a close protection guard. Now, I'm told that there's no announcement imminent, and what the Commission official spokespeople have said to me is this. We clearly appreciate the level of public interest there is in this ongoing investigation, but to protect the integrity of the investigation and to ensure a fair and just outcome, we're unable to comment further at this time, including the name of any person who may be under suspicion or the total number of suspects. They're obviously worried about a fair trial and so on. So after Craig Williams, who outed himself, we got some more names, not some particularly well-known names, members of staff who were investigated, were interviewed, certainly. Tony Lee, Director of Campaigns, wife Laura Saunders, candidate against Darren Jones, Bristol North West, Nick Mason, Data Officer. And then a week before polling day, I learned that a man called Liam Booth Smith, had been interviewed not as a suspect but as a witness about this. And then during the Tory conference, I learned also that Sir Oliver Dowden, the former Deputy Prime Minister, had also been interviewed as a witness. So many of these people have been interviewed as witnesses. The only person, as far as I'm aware, who's actually admitted putting on a bet was Craig Williams. And so it could well be that there are going to be some prosecutions, not certain yet, but the source has told us up to at least 3, possibly 5, and possibly including a politician and a close protection guard. That's what we've learned today.
John, thank you very much indeed. John Craig there, taking us through that story, which of course will, I'm sure, feature in tomorrow's newspapers. We'll have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the chief political correspondent at The Sun, Jack Elsom, and the political journalist Zoe Grunewald. Right, let's chat to Nick and Ben a bit more, shall we? I kind of remember the story really as the moment the kind of wheels started coming off the election campaign. You know, no matter had it been called, and then suddenly all anyone was talking about was whether people were trying to make a quick buck on it. Nick, you're shaking your head.
Well, it's a bit like your police story, isn't it? It's another crucial institution of this country that is just going to look to the outsiders, and I fear possibly correctly, that it's corrupt or it's not functioning properly. And as Ben said, it's important that we have belief and faith in our NHS, in our police and in our politicians, most of whom, by the way, turn up to try and do a decent job. They could probably earn far more by doing something else. They roll up their sleeves, and then I'm not presuming any guilt here, but if this is true and if people are taken and if there are convictions, I'm afraid yet again it denudes one of our great institutions.
I'd half forgotten about the betting scandal, to be honest, because we then got the D-Day thing and then it went from bad to worse. But I think it just reinforced the opinion of the public that the Tory government was tired and slightly tawdry after 14 years in office and through the Johnson and the Truss debacle. So it was a really bad thing to happen to Rishi Sunak and the Tories at the beginning of the campaign, and the law has to take its course.
Yeah, I really remember, reporting on it on this programme. You know, you kind of most election campaigns are quite tightly managed. You know, they've got certain stories that either side's trying to brief out, and this just totally took off steam. It was almost like they struggled to.
Well, it's simple for people to understand. You know, it's just it's kind of putting a bet on something using inside information. Allegedly, it's not very complicated, and it's something that people can get. That's not right.
Will there be convictions? I wouldn't bet on it.
Oh, stop it! Stop it! That was very well shoehorned in. I appreciate that very much indeed. All right, thanks both very much, Nick and Ben. There, still to come on the Politics Hub. Here are the big names who are quitting Elon Musk's X.
We've come to one of Moscow's Cold War bunkers. It was built as a top-secret command centre.
Being here really feels like you're stepping back in time. I'm Ivor Bennett, Sky's Moscow correspondent.
A show of military might and menace.
Courage, bravery and sacrifice will win the day.
It's a new subject. They'll learn about combat drones and some how to handle a Kalashnikov.
The Kremlin continues to put forward its own version of events, both present and past.
There's no mention of the fact that Russia invaded its neighbour. That's rewriting history, isn't it?
Now we have to read it carefully.
Vladimir Putin put forward his plan for a ceasefire in Ukraine, telling Kiev, pull out of your eastern territories and the war will end. Why should the West trust you?
Frankly, I don't care whether the West trusts us or not.
Vladimir Putin is already the Kremlin's longest-serving leader since Stalin. The question is, what will a fifth Putin term mean for Russia and the world? Why do you support Vladimir Putin, Mr. Segal?
I can't answer questions that stupid.
I've watched Vladimir Putin attempt to create a new world order.
The St. Petersburg Economic Forum was the backdrop to Vladimir Putin's latest verbal volley that Russia could send missiles to other nations to target the West.
Ambassador, I wonder, shall we have a quick word for Sky News?
Is the West right? Are you fueling Russia's war machine?
Swedish media, oh my God, you're not afraid of being here.
American journalist Evan Gershkovich is on trial here, who was first on display.
Russia says Evan Gershkovich was caught red-handed, but has never produced any evidence to back that up. Sky News. Get the full story first.
Gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos, analysis up at 6%. Podcasts, watching us live. Joins us live all in one place and all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
Hello, welcome back to the Politics Hub. Well, since Donald Trump's victory in the US election, there have been a number of public figures and organisations who've left Elon Musk's social media platform, X. Of course, he was involved in that campaign with Donald Trump, heading to alternatives like Threads and Blue Sky. So, is this the beginning of an exodus? Well, we thought we'd take a look at some of the big and not so big names who've left the platform. Right, let's bring in our panel. If you're wondering what on earth the final picture was, that, I can tell you, was the Clifton Suspension Bridge in Bristol, obviously.
It has its own Twitter account.
Which has its own Twitter account, and they posted the following message. With the rise in inappropriate content and decrease in meaningful engagement with our followers, we've chosen to no longer post on this account. And as you'd expect, the replies have been quite glorious. And my favourite, no need for a pylon. People have really been enjoying themselves.
A bridge too far? Can I have that one?
Bridge too far was there as well.
Oh, was it?
You'd have enjoyed some of these, Nick. They're very good. Very good. Is there a serious point here about the use of Twitter, or X, I should say? I still haven't got my head around that. And the fact that some people are just, I guess, concerned about the influence of Elon Musk.
I think there probably is. I mean, Twitter use was declining substantially before the Musk Trump love-in, but it's gone off a cliff since then. And I think people were increasingly worried about the algorithms and how it just became so full of hate and abuse and so forth. I mean, I've actually set up a Blue Sky account. I had a Threads account, didn't really seem to do very much, but I've gone with Blue Sky because that's what everyone else seems to be doing. I've kept my Twitter account for the time being. I still call it Twitter, by the way, and always will. But Blue Sky does seem to be a bit more civilised and has more people who I feel, you know, I want to read their stuff and they've got interesting things to say.
So I've also got a Blue Sky account. I've also got an X account. I just can't... It's classic, isn't it? It's just more and more places that you've got to post on.
Yeah.
But it does feel that there is quite a high engagement on Blue Sky. I guess, you know, the argument that some people have, though, are we just setting up competing online echo chambers where if you're to the right politically, you go on X, to the left, Blue Sky?
Well, look, I admire you two, and I think my radio show does have what these social media... I did occasionally dabble in it, but look, having worked in the Sun newsroom and been married, I've had enough abuse and been divorced. I have had enough abuse in my life without getting on these, and I'm regularly abused on my radio show. I don't need any more abuse. I don't know why you nice young people decide to do it. You know, it's horrible. It is so toxic, though. It's brutal out there.
On the echo chamber stuff, I mean, in the olden days, before all of this, you know, people who read the Daily Mail only read the Daily Mail. People who read the Telegraph only read the...
It's fair.
So we all had our own echo chambers. At least now you do... I think people do generally get a bit more of a cross-section
So maybe that's the problem. Maybe this is why everyone's getting so wound out. They're being forced out of their echo chambers in their life and getting these points of view on social media that they violently disagree with.
And also there's evidence that if you subject yourself to opposing views, it makes you more radical. It makes you even more extreme in your position.
Interesting.
So when people didn't know, when Liberals didn't know what readers of the Telegraph and Daily Mail
thought... It was much better.
They thought everyone else was much nicer than they would have known if they'd known what these people were like.
Oh, no.
That does make some sense, actually. It definitely does. Oh, dear. The Elon Musk thing, should we think about how we're using X, or do you think that, look, don't worry about it, don't know why everyone's so worried about it?
Yeah, I think you should use it, because I think in some instances, on a serious note, particularly when it comes to younger people, they have sustained some rather nasty, there are bullying allegations. There's even some people who we know have had real emotional health issues, and Ben and I was discussing when we came in the studio, post-COVID, there's a lot of people wrestling with a lot of bad emotional health. And I'm sorry to say, I think a lot of it is probably fueled by social media. And I'm sure it's a great tool, and I'm sure you benefit journalistic, and I'm sure you benefit politically, but it can be a source of... well, basically bullying, you know, in disguise. And I think we have to be really aware of that.
And also you can't, you know, just leave the bullying at the school
Well,
gates
no,
now.
not if you're
it comes
a kid.
back home
I could
with
walk
you.
away laughing, but these kids can't. It's very different.
Yeah. What would you do if you were Culture Secretary now?
Ugh.
Sorry.
I mean, I think...
Just a nice little light one to end the show with. How would you solve it?
I would do what they're doing. Look, I mean, we're at the foothills, really, of understanding this. I mean, it's a bit like, you know, tobacco. People used to give cigarettes to their children.
Yep.
It's about, you know, we're in the early foothills of understanding how we need to regulate this new public health harm. And, you know, I wish all the best to governments who are trying to do it. But I think it's going to have to be done because, as you know, as has just been said, the impact on people, particularly young people's mental health has been extreme.
The only thing that gives me, I guess, a bit of encouragement is thinking that, you know, parents of my generation and younger are perhaps more aware of the risks, a little bit more, you know, aware of what was happening.
But it will keep reinventing itself, won't it?
That's true.
So you will be smarter with your children than I ever would be, but they will find a way of it. That's the problem. It'll always be, well, depends, but I think it'll always be the Wild West until we start getting proper legislation. Yeah, the legislation does need to happen, and it's one that they're all kind of grappling with, isn't it? There we go. Thank you very much. Good to have a little plug of your Blue Sky account. Good to keep the abuse coming at LBC.
Yeah,
keep it coming. Come on, keep it coming.
And if you want to abuse Nick Ferrari, you can do so by phoning into his radio programme instead. So there you go. Thanks both very much. And good to have you both on the programme, Ben Bradshaw and Nick Ferrari. Well, that is it from us this evening. So much to be discussing, of course, in the weeks ahead, including, of course, that farmers' protest in Westminster. And we're also going to be talking as well more to Keir Starmer, who is off at the G20. His interview with Beth Rigby on tomorrow's show. I'll see you tomorrow at 7 p.m. Up next, it is the UK Tonight with Sarah J. Mee, and then The World with Gillian Joseph, which is at 9 p.m. on Sky News. I'll see you tomorrow.
Day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
They want a job in a normal life. Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.